That's okay with everybody. And welcome. Hi, everybody. As you know, likely, my name is Paula Price. I am a lawyer turned coach for lawyers. And today we are talking about 6 steps to sustainable success in 2023. Welcome. I'm so glad that you joined me here today. Thank you for taking time out of your schedule. I know today is a very tough day to make it. We are really getting into the heart of the holiday season, today being the 21st of December. It's also a pretty pivotal year. It is the shortest day of the year, which I always find really exciting because it means that moving forward, we get more light, the temperature gets warmer, and we really are transitioning into the next year. And I'm delighted that you've joined me today because we're going to talk about creating sustainable success in 2023. Now, as I mentioned before we started the broadcast, I would love for you to participate in today's session. You can do that through the chat. You can do that through the Q&A. If you want to submit a question, you can do that anonymously by hitting the anonymous box. You just have to put a check mark there. You don't have to. You could also submit with your name. The questions are open for everybody to see. And you can also participate using the chat. So you can select to the panelist and host. That would mean it would just go to me. Or you can select the chat option that it goes to everybody. So I invite you to do that if you are inclined. And today's session is for you if, and there's a number of ifs on this list. So you have big goals that you want to accomplish next year. And if you're here, I know that you have something that you're wanting to work on. I love the work that I do because I get to help lawyers achieve the goals that they are looking to accomplish. And so often it means a job transition, it's practice management, it's leadership, it's promotions. And so whatever it is that you have on your mind, this is a great session for us to workshop it and for you to get some clarity and ideas about how to move forward. This is for you if you love the promise of a fresh start, but you don't want to set yourself up to fail if you don't succeed right away. And I think the new year can kind of be a bit of a trap for that. And I love New Year's resolutions. I think it's such a great time of year. We have a fresh slate, 365 uncharted days to make magic happen. But that can also put a lot of pressure to come up with these really expensive goals. And sometimes I think that we can get caught up in the momentum of the pressure of creating the goals. And then if we don't have a plan for them, or we're not taking action on them right away, the way that we'd hoped, then we can give up on those goals. And so today, what I'm really focusing on are sustainable strategies so that we can have that momentum build and have the result of achieving our goals over the course of the year. So we're not looking at just those first 2 weeks of January to make things happen. This is really something we're committing to for the longer period. This session is for you if you associate success with hustle and stress. So I think we've all been in those moments, those situations where hustle and stress were absolutely required to achieve the goal, but there are other ways of doing it. And so I want to share some ideas that can help us lean into more sustainable sources of energy. You want strategies that will allow for more grace and ease without compromising quality or results. So I know with lawyers in particular, we have such high standards. And so the idea here is to have strategies that feel better, that seem easier, but where you're not compromising on the work product, on the results that you're trying to create. And then finally, you want to create success that is sustainable, not just an exercise of willpower. So if you've ever tried making changes based on willpower alone, then you have probably experienced that can feel like a finite resource. And so what we're going to talk about today is strategies that will help you align with your goals better so that you don't feel like you're swimming upstream. On our agenda today, we've got 60 minutes together. I'm going to be offering 6 tools, and I'm going to invite each of you to come up with one goal to work on during today's webinar. Now, I would invite all of you to have a piece of paper, preferably a blank sheet of paper, a pen or a pencil, something to write with. And I'm going to invite you to focus on writing out answers to the questions as I'm asking them of you. And I may be leaving some spaces, some silences during the course of today's presentation, which feels a little bit awkward on Zoom. But when I do that, it's on purpose, because What I find with these types of sessions is that the real work, the real learning, the takeaways for you are going to come from you answering some of these questions. And I want to give you the space to be able to do that. And of course, you are welcome to ask questions. You are welcome to populate the chat. I am keeping my eye on both of those things as we go through today's session. So what we're going to cover today, we are going to talk about these 6 tools. Tool number 1 is to celebrate. We're going to spend some time honoring your achievements, specifically looking at 2022. Then we're going to think about one thing. We're going to choose a goal for you to work on in 2023, and we're going to make it great. And you'll see what I mean by that in a moment. Third, we're going to focus on motivation. And motivation is key for sustainable success. Motivation is a topic that comes up with clients that I work with, where even some of the most successful lawyers sometimes feel like the motivation part is waning. And so I'm going to offer some tools to help reboot motivation. If you find that, once the excitement, the novelty of the new year wears off, how do you get yourself back on track? Fourth is sustainable fuel. So I mentioned in the intro, sometimes we rely on hustle or stress to get things done. Sometimes I refer to that as a more reactive way of being in practice. And what we're going to talk about today is being in a more creative state. So looking at fuel sources that are more sustainable. Fifth, we're going to talk about self-concept. Now, this is a topic I could probably speak about for an entire webinar on its own. But here we're really getting into how you conceive of yourself, your way of defining and describing yourself, your relationship with yourself. To me, this is at the core of building self-trust, which again enhances your abilities to sustain the success that you're trying to build, because you are going to, number one, build that relationship with yourself and also create sustained and aligned actions that flow from that version of you. And I'll explain that more when we get to that part of this webinar. And then finally, strategy number 6 is support. So that's really looking at what supports are you building in externally to help you move forward as you work toward your goals. So with that, we're going to dive into the first topic, which is celebrate. And before we think about setting any new goals, what I would invite all of you to do is first to zoom out. And the reason I'm asking you to do this is that when we get to the start of a new year and we have this blank slate ahead of us, sometimes, and I fall into this category, we can get so caught up on looking at the goals that we have, right? So here we are, position A, we want to get to position B. And so what we see is that gap between where we are now and where we want to go. And it's a gap. But if we zoom out, what we will notice is that that gap is actually not as large when you put it into context relative to what you have already accomplished. So as we focus on what you want to do in 2023, first of all, let's step back to 2021. Let's go back to December 21st, 2021, or thereabouts, and let's think about what it is that you have already accomplished over the past year. So here's one of the areas where I'd like you to pull out your pen and paper and do some reflection on what it is that you have accomplished over the past year. So if you go back a year and think about 2022, what goals did you achieve in 2022? Now, I have had the benefit, I'm just going to, thank you, pull up. I have the benefit of knowing many of you and of having had conversations with some of you and of working with some of you. And so that is a benefit because I know that you have been working on very specific goals, and I know what goals you've been working on and how much you've already accomplished over the course of the past year. So some of the goals that you have been working on, or clients that I've been working on, sometimes it's a job transition. So maybe you have transitioned in a job. Sometimes it's leadership. Maybe you can think about examples over the course of the past year where you've really stepped into a leadership role, whether it's leading in a team capacity. Sometimes it's leadership of self, stepping into your own sense of confidence and authority and power. So what did you achieve? What goals did you set for yourself in 22 that you have now stepped into? Now, the second question that I'm going to ask here is, what opportunities came your way without your trying? And what I'd love you to consider is, what did come your way that was unexpected? And if I look back on the year that I have had, 2022 and 2021 even, there are certain opportunities that have come to fruition that were not opportunities that I ever could have imagined, but they came my way and they were amazing opportunities. And I know the same is true for you. So you might think about a project, for example, at your work that was unexpected. Maybe you had a new client come to you through a connection of a connection of a connection that you were not expecting. Maybe you were asked to speak at a conference and it wasn't something that you had even planned on having happen, but you did it. And as a result, you made new connections. Maybe you received new work opportunities from that opportunity. Here, what I'm inviting you to consider is, what are some of the opportunities that came your way? And what I would invite you to think about is how these opportunities come to you, and they're unexpected in the sense that you can't necessarily pull the strings to make them happen. But chances are those opportunities came your way because of some of the work that you have been doing that attracted attention to you. Now, the next category here is, what decisions did you make? And this is a really significant category for you to give yourself credit for. Some of the work that I do with clients and some of the hardest work is decision making. And if we've worked together, then chances are we've spent time on a difficult decision that you are making in your practice. This comes up particularly for lawyers who are looking to transition in their jobs. Those decisions can be really difficult to make because there's a sense of having built up a reputation, built up a practice area, built up relationships within one particular organization. And sometimes a transition means giving up on something that you've already built in order to reach for something new and different. So that's an example of a type of decision that can be really difficult to make. And here I'd invite you to think about what decisions you have made over the course of the year that were tough decisions. And if we look at the next bullet on this list, what difficult conversations did you have? Chances are some of the decisions that you made revolved around having difficult conversations. So it may have been a conversation where you needed to set a boundary with somebody. You needed to say no to work. You needed to ask for something within your organization. Sometimes it's negotiating a salary increase or a rate increase, and that may have been a difficult conversation for you to enter into. So before we move on to the next point, I would just like you to think about, what decisions did you make last year? What difficult conversations did you have last year? And how has that set you up for where you are today? The next item here is, what was your bravest moment? And I get it. A year is a long time to reflect back on, but chances are maybe it was the result of one of these conversations. Maybe it was one of these decisions where you really had to take a risk, where you had to put yourself out there. And I know from experience and from lawyers that I work with, those difficult decisions are not easily made. Often there's a lot of emotion that precedes those decisions. And also, after those decisions, there's a certain sense of satisfaction of having risen to the challenge, of having made that tough call, of having dealt with that difficult situation. And then there's the pride that you feel on the other side of it. So let's celebrate some of those moments that you have had over the past year where you've really stepped up to the challenge. The next one here is, what skills did you develop over the year? And I again smile because as I think about some of you who I know are on the line here, I can think of some of the skills that you've been developing. For some of you, you're well into your career and you've got challenges in terms of leadership, really significant career direction decisions that you're making that come on the heels of years of practice. And for some of you, you're at beginning stages of your practice. And so some of the skills are going to be some of those new lawyering skills that are made during that very steep learning curve period of your practice. For some of you, it's going out on your own and figuring out how to run your own firm, your own operation. What is involved there? For some of you, it's polishing some of your skills as a lawyer, whether you're a litigator or a solicitor. What is it that you're refining? Your expertise is getting to be that much more polished. And finally, I would ask you to consider what is true today that would have surprised you a year ago. And for this, I think going back to those opportunities that came your way without trying, there might be a linkage here, right? Something that you weren't expecting, something that you weren't planning for. And if I had said to you, hey, listen, when we have our webinar, first of all, you're going to be at a webinar with me on December 21st, 2022, and you're going to be doing this thing, what would truly surprise you? So now that we've gone through these questions, I'm going to invite you to think about this year, this coming year, 2023. And again, I'm going to invite you to, with your pen and paper, write out in bullet form some of the goals that you have for 2023. Now here, I don't want you to limit yourself by what's realistic, what is doable, what is practical, what's most important, what's least important. Categories, it can be health related, it can be practice related, it can be family related. It doesn't need to be contained in any specific category. All I'm inviting you to do here is to just jot down on a piece of paper a handful of things that you would love to see happen in 2023. If they're bigger goals, maybe 5-year goals, write those down too, because that might be an anchor or a North Star for you in terms of figuring out what some of your goals might be for 2023. So as you do that, I am going to switch over to the next slide, which will bring us to the next tool. So that first tool that we looked at in terms of creating sustainable success is to celebrate. It is to acknowledge where you are and how far you've come before you turn to that next goal. And there is a reason for that beyond the exercise of just going through it and feeling good. That feeling good actually serves a purpose. It is reinforcing for yourself, almost like a dopamine loop, right? When you finish that thing, when you acknowledge yourself for having done something, for having achieved something, you actually close that circuitry, and it helps you to instill a habit of setting the goal, achieving the goal, and following through and feeling good about it. So now that we've done that, now that we've situated ourselves in that space of accomplishment and looking forward to 2023, I'm going to ask you to look at that list that you've just brainstormed, some goals, some ideas for 2023, and we're going to do a couple of things with that list. Number one is we are going to narrow it down to just one thing. And I think my favorite topic, or my favorite learning on this topic that I've seen recently, and as a coach, I see quite a bit on prioritizing and goal setting and all of that, comes from a book written by Greg McKeown, hope I'm pronouncing that right, called Essentialism. You'll see that the lowercase e on my slide is not an accident. And this is a book that I learned about this year. If you hear the doorbell ringing in the background, it's because it is ringing. I think the kids are having fun down there. Speaking of essentialism, this is the one thing. And Greg McKeown talks about this concept of focusing on just one thing. And I love the diagram that I've reproduced here. And what he talks about is when you have your energy split into multiple different directions, you come out looking like this wheel on the left. Your energy is a bunch of short arrows, but you don't really make a lot of headway in any particular direction. Versus if you look at that image on the right, where the energy is focused in one channel, you get so much further. And another parallel that I like to think of in this way is the airplane or the rocket fuel analogy, right? If you are trying to get a rocket ship from planet Earth into outer space, however that works, you need so much energy to create the momentum to propel that rocket out of, off the Earth, out of the atmosphere and into space. And so the same is true of your goals. If you have a list of goals and you try to tackle them all at once, chances are you're going to be spending your energy in all sorts of different places without necessarily getting very far. And there is a counterpoint to this. So the idea here is we want to have a singular focus. And for today's webinar, we are going to pick one thing. But I also acknowledge and recognize that in your practice, in your life, it is not possible to say, I'm just going to do one thing. And frankly, I don't think we just want one thing that we're doing, because I think it's helpful when you have multiple pots on the stove to motivate, right? I know for myself, I like to have different things going on. It's motivating. So here, what I'm not saying is let's only do one thing, but let's pick one goal that will be the goal that you strive for this year. And we're going to focus on it in today's webinar. You can continue to have other objectives. You can continue to maintain in other areas. You're going to have your practice that's running. You're going to have your family commitments. You're going to have your health commitments. All those things, they stay in focus, and you continue to work on those things as well. But when it comes to that goal, this is the thing that if you didn't focus on it, it wouldn't happen, right? And so it might be a leftover goal from last year. And just a personal example of that is the podcast that I produce. It was a to-do item on my list of goals for, I want to say, a year or two before I decided to really get serious about it. And to make that happen, I retained a coach because I knew that doing that would compel me to take action and make that goal happen. And so for me, that was my goal. And it didn't mean that I didn't have other goals. I had lots of other goals, but that was the one that I chose to really commit to and prioritize, because I knew that if I didn't do that, it wouldn't happen. Another way that you might pick a goal is looking at something that causes you a great deal of stress. Maybe by solving for that thing, you then create a lot of ease, or a lot more ease in your life and your practice. When it comes to goals, you might pick something that energizes you. And if that's possible, I love that approach, because just looking at something and seeing that it creates a sense of excitement is a sign that this is something that's important to you and that it would be really compelling to you moving forward. So look at the list that you've written out, the goals that you have as ideas for next year, and I would invite you to pick one of those things. Look at that list, see which one maybe stands out to you, and maybe it's one that, it's the goal that you had last year that you never got around to, or it's the goal that seems most exciting to you. As you look at the letters on your page, that one just seems to leap out to you. So pick a goal, and if you decide at the end of this that it's not the goal that you really wanted to do, you can always go back and pick a different goal and do the exercises over again. But for now, pick a goal, because we're going to spend some time working on that particular goal. So the next question I have for you is to take that goal, and we're going to break it down using a GREAT goal framework. We're going to take that goal and make it great. Now, if you have been to previous sessions that I've taught, you are likely to be familiar with the GREAT goal concept. And so let's revisit it. If it's as new to you, the GREAT goal framework is my adaptation of a SMART goal. And you may have heard of SMART goals: SMART, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Those are the criteria for a GREAT goal. I've taken that framework and adapted it because I think what is even more compelling to have within your goals are some of the emotional and values-driven components that propel you forward. And I think some of those are captured in a GREAT goal, in a SMART goal, but here I've just emphasized that a little bit more. So going back to your goal, number one is G for great. What result do you want to create? And when you look at a SMART goal, for example, there's an emphasis on making your goal specific and measurable. And I think those are criteria that you want to think about as you set a goal for yourself. So if you're looking out to 2023 and you want to be able to say in December you have met your goal, you want to be able to create your goal in a way that it is actually measurable. So, for example, if you're transitioning jobs, that is a measurable goal, because you'll know that you've done it because you've gone from job A to job B. Something like practice management is a little bit more difficult to create a goal around, because having a better organized practice is a little bit vague. So you'll want to break that down into something that's a bit more measurable. Maybe the goal becomes, I have a system for tracking my weeks and I follow that system consistently. Maybe it's, I have a practice that whatever deliverable I have is typically ready the day or 2 days before the actual due date. If you want to have more confidence in your practice, for example, confidence, again, that is a difficult goal to measure. So you might have some other ways of measuring confidence. Sometimes that might be a scale rating, right? You might give yourself a sense of, okay, I want to feel like a 7 out of 10, 60% of the time. That would be a way of taking confidence and giving it a more measurable, objective way of assessing whether or not you've reached that goal. It may also be that there are certain things that you're not doing now because you don't feel confident. So the goal might be that you're actually doing that, maybe it's raising your hand in a meeting. It's making an application on your own in court. I mean, you get to decide what the confidence goal looks like, but the idea here is to create a goal that is measurable. The R is the reason. So what is important to you about your goal? And this question is probably one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself for any goal that you have. When I went through my coach training, this was the number one question. What is important to you about X? Worded that way. It's not a why question. Some people use the word why, and that's fine. But why tends to be a little bit more introspective, whereas a what question has you focusing on what it is that's important. It's more forward-looking. So if you say to yourself, okay, the goal here is that I want to transition jobs, what is important to you about that? Maybe it's the impact that you can create. Maybe it's a sense of autonomy and contribution. If your goal is better practice management, it's because you want to feel more at peace. You want to build trust with your clients. You want to build trust with yourself. So that R is what is important to you about your goal. And we're going to come back to that in the next section. So see what you can find for now, and we will revisit this. The third is energy. So this is where I think the SMART goals don't really capture how it is that you want to proceed with your goals. And the reason that I think energy is an area that we want to focus on goes back to that idea of that hustle. So we will revisit this when we talk about sustainable fuel, but that hustle energy versus a more confident and sustainable energy that we can bring to our goals. So if you think about a job transition, how do you want to make that transition? Chances are the energy you want to bring isn't haste or hustle or desperation or one of these more lower forms or lower vibe energies, right? What you're going to want to do is to come to that transition from a place of confidence, from a place of determination, commitment. And I'll mention, I have a podcast episode with Beth Mountford, and she's a legal recruiter with Smith Legal Counsel. And there's a part of that conversation where she talks about making career decisions from the space of a safe harbor. And the point that she was making is kind of like, you don't want to build your house when it's raining. You want to build your house or your roof when it's raining. You want to build on a sunny day. So you want to be in a position where it's as sunny as possible, because the energy you bring matters. If you think about exams, for example, maybe you were like me and you studied, and sometimes you had those all-nighters where you're up all night studying. It's kind of a hasty, stressed energy. And that's fine for short-term objectives. But when you want to have a sustainable goal, you want to be deliberate about how you approach it, because how you achieve your goal matters. It will impact how you experience the end result. So A is for action. What action steps do you need to take to reach your goal? And here, a bullet point list is ideal. What are some of the steps that you need to take? If you don't know what steps you need to take, maybe one of your first steps is to research the steps that you need to take. But here you want to be as specific as possible, because it's easier for you to then act on a goal that has been broken down into bite-sized pieces versus that first goal. So if your first goal is get a new job, and your action points are, if it's just get a new job, it's vague, it's big. So we want to break that down. If it's time management, okay, well, how am I going to approach time management from an action perspective? Maybe it's sit down and do some research, reflect on what strategies have worked best for me in the past. What do I like as forms of support? Do I like electronic calendars or paper calendars? So give yourself some action bullet points, and those will be the starting point for when you go to execute on your goal. Now, T, I think, is a very powerful criteria, because we can look at our goals from different time perspectives. One is maybe that you want this goal for the end of the year, in which case the T might be a year. But chances are all those action points that you picked out, those bullets, are not going to take a full year. And some of them might be small and intense, and some of them might be longer term. So if, for example, part of your goal is that you want to carve out a role for yourself within your existing organization that doesn't yet exist, you may need to have a very difficult conversation with somebody in your organization. That conversation itself may require a lot of thought. It may require a lot of courage for you to initiate it, and it might feel really challenging. So if you can look at that conversation and then give it a time estimate, maybe that time estimate is this conversation is going to last 15 minutes. I can do anything for 15 minutes. It allows you to make that goal a lot more doable. So here, I'd invite you to think about not just the goal on the long-term perspective, but as you break down your goal into smaller pieces, how long is each component really going to take? Another reason time is important is, can you make time for it on your calendar? So for example, if your goal is like my goal of creating a podcast, it's not something that's in your day-to-day currently, and you need to make space for it. This is a great time to be honest with yourself about how much time you'll need to dedicate to that goal and how you're going to incorporate it into your practice. This comes up in planning. For clients who struggle with time management, part of the challenge often is not having time in their calendar to actually sit down and plan their week. So part of that goal is being realistic that they're going to need to spend an hour, maybe a half an hour, some amount of time on a weekend, on a Monday morning, planning for the week. If your goal is you're building a practice, you may need to spend some non-billable focused time on strategizing on how you are going to build your practice. If you want to be doing speaking, same thing. So let's figure out how much time you're going to need to make these things happen. Now, the next category is the exclamation point. And the exclamation point is the wild card. What has not been captured in this great goal framework that is important to you? Now, this may take you back to an initial reason. It might take you to some other reason altogether. But I would invite you to ask yourself that question after you've gone through this initial exercise of breaking down the components of your goal and asking yourself, what else? What is missing here that is important? So that was our second strategy. So going back, our first strategy was number one, appreciate how far you've come before you jump into creating your goal. The second was to take your goal and focus on one thing. And then we broke down that goal using a great goal framework. The third is motivation. Motivation is key to sustainable success because it's really easy to lose, right? I mean, the motivation that comes with the calling of a new year is palpable because you've got that fresh slate, you've got momentum, you've possibly also got that buildup, right? If you have been dealing with a really stressful situation and 2022 is kind of that breaking point, you've reached December and you've had enough, there's a lot of motivation to get a fresh start in January. For billing targets, for example, you wrap up your year and now you start with a fresh slate. There's a lot of motivation to get started. But sometimes you get a few weeks into your goal and you feel like you're not making progress. And so you then start to stall out. Maybe you abandon that goal altogether. So I'm going to offer 2 tools to help you with motivation that you can use to reboot when you find that maybe you're drifting. So the first is the reason. And this is an exercise that I learned very recently in a course that I'm taking. I'm taking a additional coaching training specifically for ADHD coaching. It's amazing. It's all about executive function. And what we focused on last week actually was goal setting, and motivation is a part of it. And we talked about the reasons for having a goal and broke those reasons down into preventative reasons and promotional reasons. And so what you might find when you're setting goals is that there are reasons, like things that you're trying to prevent and things that you're trying to promote. And I have a picture up here that relates to health because I think health is a very easy way to look at preventative and promotional. So let's say one of your goals for the new year is that you want to eat healthy, get enough sleep, get more exercise. You might turn those into, these specific measurable goals, if that is your goal. So what are you trying to prevent? You might be trying to prevent disease. You might be trying to prevent sickness. You might be trying to prevent fatigue and inability to perform because you're not feeling well. Days off of work. I mean, there's a whole host of things that you might be trying to prevent. What might you be trying to promote? Well, you might be trying to promote longevity. You might be trying to promote feeling better, more energized, having energy to keep up with your practice and to keep up with your family. Those might be your promotional goals. So if you look at the goals that you have, and you've already articulated some reasons for your goal, what are some of the preventative reasons and what are some of the promotional? So using the example of better managed time, you might be trying to prevent broken trust. You might be trying to prevent late submissions. You might be trying to prevent ruptured relationships with your clients, stress in your practice. What you might be trying to promote: trust, a sense of well-being, submissions that are in on time. So you can see how that works. And this is one way of really focusing in on the reasons and getting granular about them. Again, if you wanted to use the example of transitioning in your career, right? Making a decision there. Preventative is maybe you're trying to move away from feeling stuck or stagnant. And promotion is maybe starting that next chapter sooner so that you can start building faster. Now, another tool that you can use if you find that motivation has become a challenge is to do a contrasting exercise. Again, this is an exercise that I learned just the other week, which I find very impactful, which is to look at, and it's a version of something that I've experienced before, that I've seen used before. And this is the idea of contrasting what would happen if you do the goal and what happens if you don't. And I learned it as more of a present future exercise, but I think we can also bring in the past. And given that it is the holiday season, I thought that Scrooge and his ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future, were an apt analogy here. And if you're familiar with A Christmas Carol, or if you're not familiar with A Christmas Carol, there's a part of this story where the main character, who I think is called Ebenezer Scrooge, I've honestly only seen the Disney version of this, but they take the Mickey Scrooge, or I think it's Donald Duck. Anyways, there's a Scrooge guy, and he goes back in time, and you see the ghosts of Christmas past, and you see the ghosts of Christmas future, and then the present. And so what I'd invite you to think about is you in relation to your goal, going into the past, going into the future, and what happens if you don't make that change. So if, for example, your goal is that you want to set boundaries, better boundaries around your time, around the scope of work that you're going to do, you might look back and say, I can see these examples where me not setting boundaries led to these consequences that were not favorable to me, to others in general. And you might say to yourself, presently, I can see here how a lack of boundaries is impacting me. I can see how it's impacting the way I manage my time. It's impacting the energy I have available to do the work on my plate. It's affecting the relationships that I have. I'm feeling resentful. I'm feeling stuck. And you might look to the future and say, I can continue doing this. And this is the result. This is the likely result if I don't start implementing boundaries. Or you can say, okay, I can start implementing boundaries. And when I do that, here's what's going to be different going forward. If I can say no at the outset, maybe it's, I'll use the example of a bake sale or a non-billable project that's not really aligned with your project. It's something that you would potentially take on that would require a lot of your time and energy that wasn't necessarily helping you move toward your goal, especially perhaps the goal that you're thinking about right now. And so if you imagine your future with not taking that thing on and instead applying your energy and time focused on what you want, what does that look like? Versus if you take on that responsibility that doesn't truly align. And what is the difference there? So you want to do that compare and contrast. And as I think of this example, it brings me back to a CLE that I attended a few years ago, where a lawyer was talking about some of these types of assignments that potentially can come your way. And she said, and I think this is very true, that if somebody comes to you and asks you to be involved in a project and it really doesn't align with you, you do not have time for it, you are so much better off saying no, no, thank you. I'd love to help you, but I don't have capacity, whatever the rationale is, to say it in the moment than to say yes and then have that be an ongoing struggle. Because if you say no at the beginning, it's not that hard for the person asking to go and ask somebody else, to find someone else to do that work for you. But if you say yes and you're not truly committed, then that can be an ongoing, almost a heavy experience. And as I say this, I can think of examples where I've fallen into that pattern. You likely can draw on some examples from when you may have said yes in that type of situation. And so what we really want to do is be clear about where we're saying yes and where we're saying no. So again, pulling back to where we are in terms of our webinar today, this is the third tool, right? How to stay motivated. Number one is to get really clear on the reasons for your goal. What are you preventing? What are you promoting? And then do that contrasting exercise. If I'm able to fulfill my goal, what good is going to come of that? What will happen if I don't fulfill my goal? And why is that not a desirable outcome? And then you can use that to motivate yourself moving forward. Now, if you have any questions, I would invite you to put those in the Q&A. I haven't seen any so far. I have been keeping my eye on them, but I'd love to hear from you. And we have about 18 minutes left, which is great because we're on number 4, sustainable fuel. And yeah, I hope that you're all following along. And like I said, if you want to comment, please do. So sustainable fuel. This is going back. If you look at the great goal, the energy component. I never even thought about what type of fuel I was using for my goals until I became a coach. And now I think about it all of the time. When I sit down, even today, I did my own great goal. Here it is on a sticky note. I looked at the type of energy that I wanted to bring to today's webinar. What I chose for my energy: confident, steady, committed. Hopefully I'm doing all of those things. Again, the fuel is important because you will not have a happy ending from an unhappy journey. And I forget where that quote came from, and I mixed it up a little bit, but you get the point. If you're approaching your practice in a reactive, stressed, panic state, that is what you're creating more of. Versus if you can find a way to navigate your practice from a more calm and collected place, that is what you will create. So what I'd invite you to think about is, what is fueling you in your practice? And for some of you, it might be that fear. It might be urgency. The deadline is coming. I need to get it done. And sometimes when it's a goal, it might be fantasy, right? You might see the year ahead and think, well, this is the year that I'm going to open my own firm. But maybe you're further away from that. You haven't quite reached the stage that you need to be at to do that. And I'm thinking of a client right now he's kind of the opposite, in the sense that he knows that ultimately what he wants is his own firm, but the leadway that he's given himself for that is measurable in years, not days or weeks. And so the question here is, looking at the goal that you have, is it a goal that is doable within the time frame that you're giving yourself, or is it one of these fantasy goals? An example that comes to mind is if you never go to the gym, and you declare that on January 1st, you are going to go to the gym every day of the week for the entire year, there's going to be a disconnect there. There's going to be an adjustment period. You may be able to make that transition, but it may also be that the goal is just too big relative to where you are now. That habit is too much of a stretch. It might just not be sustainable. So think about, what is it? What energy, what emotion is fueling your actions? So we talked about fear, urgency, and fantasy. What about certainty, patience, and service? So if you were certain that you were committed to following through on your goal, no matter what happens, what kind of an energy do you then act with? If patience, if you're willing to embark on your goal knowing that it's not going to take place immediately, and you're okay with that, what difference does that make when you sit down to do the work necessary to reach your goal? Service. I think this is one of the most compelling energies from which to operate. When you think about the person on the other side of service, whether it is your client, whether it is your colleague, whether it is your family, when you think about the impact that you're creating to the benefit of somebody else, that is an energy of service. And to me, that is the antidote to so many of the internal objections that come up when we go to do our work. For example, speaking, that is an area where I find it challenging. But when I think about you on the other side, it puts me in a space of service. I'm no longer worried about how I show up as a speaker. I'm thinking about you, and are you learning what I'm hoping for you to learn? Are you able to create the impact that you want to create? Now, I noticed there's a question, so I'm just going to check on the question that's come in, and let me just see. Okay, I'm going to read this question because I think it's very, very relevant, and thank you for this question. Most lawyers are in a fight or flight mode, trying to stay on top of client files and litigation. It's energy that is fueled from fear and urgency. What is the best way to have a lawyer step away from that mindset just long enough to show them a new way to practice law that will remove all of the negative problems that come from traditional law practice? What is the best way to have a lawyer step away from that mindset just long enough to show them? So that is a really excellent question. I think I see the first part of that is that default way of thinking. And how do you have them step away from that mindset? I think you need to find them in that space where they are stepping away from their practice, right? I mean, to have a conversation like that, I think what you're wanting to do is, because there's two things here, is you're wanting to teach them, but you're also wanting to find them. I think the best approach there is to schedule something with them at a time when you know that they're going to be available. So for example, I tried scheduling today's webinar at a lunchtime with the idea that this would be a window within the time frame that people would be available and open. And I think the way there to bring them into that mindset, and feel free to contact me offline, because I think that is actually probably a bigger question than I can answer in this webinar, is to focus maybe on helping them navigate some of the challenges, the reasons for that flight or flight mode. So again, going to this next point, which is proactive versus reactive. This is that fight or flight scenario, is that often if you're working from that reactive state, and lawyers that I hear from sometimes are very much in that reactive state. They talk about their practice running them instead of the other way around. And part of the challenge of being in that state is that it actually stifles your creativity. When you are in that fight or flight mode, you have less access to your creativity because your body is actually shutting down and conserving resources so that you can focus on literally survival. And so what you want to be able to do is to move yourself into that creative or proactive state where you have access over creativity. So again, going back to that question, I think timing is really a big part of it. And then finding a way to speak with the lawyer that pulls them into that creative state. So focusing on what's working is one way to do that. Focusing on areas where you can grow is another way to do that. Now, I'm going to move quickly through these last two tools, because I realize that we have about 10 minutes left and I want to make sure we wrap up today on time. And this fourth concept is self-concept. This is an area where, again, I never really heard of this before I became a coach, but now I realize just how powerful this can be, because our self-concept is how we perceive ourselves. If any of you have young kids or children and you have parented, you may have learned a parenting tool or advice that I learned, which was when your child does something that is bad, pick a fight with their sibling, throw the milk on the floor, not do their homework, you never want to label the child as being a bad child for having done something that is bad. You might label the behavior as bad or some other word, maybe it's inappropriate or not ideal, whatever you want to use, but you don't want to label that child in a negative way. And self-concept is a similar exercise. You don't want to identify yourself as something negative and internalize that as who you are. So for example, if you procrastinate, you don't really want to conceive of yourself as a procrastinator. You also want to be mindful of what you choose as a label that is a positive label, right? You might decide, I'm a finisher. I'm a proactive lawyer. I help people get the job done. So this piece of self-concept is something that you can develop. And to me, it really does form the core of the relationship that you have with yourself, which again, might be a bizarre concept. If you're not used to thinking about the relationship you have with yourself, that might be new, but the way that we speak to ourselves, the way that we conceive of ourselves, all that really matters. And it is reflected in the interactions that we have with others. Now, I've got a list of questions here, and I realize we probably don't have time to go through all of these with a lot of space to allow for it. So I'm just going to read through these and invite you to do these questions on your own, or as much as you can do them today. So if you think about the goal that you have and where you are now, chances are there are elements of your self-concept that you're going to need to modify to become the person who has achieved that goal. So, for example, if you are a procrastinator, you label yourself as a procrastinator, and you want to become a person who submits their work on time, meets deadlines with ease. There's some work, there's a gap. So what do you need to stop doing? You probably need to stop thinking of yourself as a procrastinator. Number one, right? You need to perhaps start thinking of yourself as somebody who sometimes procrastinates. You can create some distance from that. You may need to stop engaging in behaviors that lead you to that point. What do you need to start doing? Next question, figuring out a way to manage your time, having a schedule, having a discipline of calendaring, finding supports to help you achieve things on time. What is different about that person? So if you look at where you are now and who that person is in the future, what's different? What are they doing that you're not currently doing? How do you speak to yourself? This is probably one of the areas where I really see so much growth and impact with clients that I work with, because when you initially come to me and you describe the story, there's so much internal dialogue that you may not even realize you have. So you might dismiss yourself or be really hard on yourself and you don't even see it. And so once you start recognizing that there is this dialogue going on and that you can change it, there's so much that opens up on the other side of that. And this follows into the next point, which is what words do you use to describe yourself? So this is step 5, to create that sustainable success. We want to create a self-concept that is aligned with the goal that you want to achieve. And then the actions that flow from that are aligned. So your actions for your goal are aligned with who you are. It will feel so much easier. And finally, support. When you go out to set out on your big goals, you want to create an environment that supports you in achieving those goals. That might be your physical environment. Is your office conducive to what you're trying to create? Is it organized in a way that supports you in reaching your goals? Do you have colleagues who look at you and who hold you in high esteem, who hold you accountable, responsible, and capable for achieving what it is that you want to achieve? Are you being supported in your home? If you've got a family, children, others that you are supporting, do you have the support that you need? Maybe it's care for your children. Maybe it's someone who helps out within the home. Do you have the structural support required? The next here that I'll talk about is planning and executing. Do you have the structure and support in your calendar to give life to the goals that you want to create? Do you have the time for it? Can you make the time for it? Are you supported in the execution of these goals? The third category here is personal and professional relationships. So when you set out to achieve your goals, you know there are going to be challenges, especially if this is a big goal that you haven't yet achieved. And so what kind of support will you have? What mentors might you have in your workplace, for example? What colleagues do you have? What staff do you have to support you in the goals that you're trying to reach? And finally, what other supports do you have, whether it's mentors, coaches, a community that supports you. And here I would invite you to really think about each of these categories of support and how you can build those in as you move forward toward your goals. So to recap from today, we talked about 6 tools to help you create sustainable success in 2023. I'm going to recap those now. 1 is to celebrate. Number 2 is to look at your list of objectives and pick one and go deep on that one goal. The 3rd is to have tools to renew your motivation. We talked about having those preventative and promotional reasons for your goals. We talked about having that contrasting exercise. What do you achieve by doing your goal? What do you miss out on if you do not? We talked about sustainable fuel. So what kind of an energy are you bringing to your work? We talked about self-concept. So how do you conceive of yourself? And how do you align your self-concept with the goal that you're seeking to achieve? And then finally, what kind of support do you have in place to help you reach those goals? Now, I don't think I mentioned at the beginning, but I think I mentioned in the announcement for this webinar that I did want to share a little bit about some of the offerings that I have. There are 2 that I'll mention today. 1 is a group coaching program, and I know some of you who are here today have reached out to talk to me about that program or have enrolled in that program, and I'm delighted to have you here and so excited to welcome you into the program. I'm so excited to have the opportunity to create a group of women lawyers who are high achieving, like-minded, who are looking for the support and a community to help you achieve the goal that you have set for yourself. It is a 6-month program. I've got some of the details on this slide. The idea is we will have a theme for each month. We will have 2 group calls monthly. We will have 2 private sessions. So I sort of conceive of these as happening maybe at the beginning to set the goal up and talk about some of the challenges that you might experience. And then partway through, or as we're nearing the end, to kind of solidify where you're going with your goals. And we're going to have 2 bonus classes, one on career transitions and one on time management. These are topics that come up a lot in my practice with lawyers. And of course, the element of community support. And if you're interested in learning more about that program, please do reach out to me. I would be delighted to talk to you about it, to talk to you about the themes that we're going to have each month and how I can support you in community in achieving the goals that you have for this year. If you're not a woman lawyer, but you are interested in having support from me, I do private coaching, that is one-to-one coaching, and please do reach out to me in relation to that if you're interested. We will put together a plan. I will explain how the process works. Usually it involves getting clear about what the goal is that you're working on, what kind of timeline you're looking for, how often you think it would be appropriate for us to meet. All of these happen over Zoom. So for the group coaching, we're going to be doing Zoom meetings so that we can all be in a room together. So unlike a webinar where you just see me, we will see each other. And of course, for the private coaching, same is true. We're on a Zoom call where we can see each other. So those are the things that I was hoping to share with you today. I see we're really at time. There are no new questions and I don't see anything in the chat. So with that, I am going to thank you all for joining me here today. I'm going to wish all of you a very happy holiday and so much success in the new year. One of the goals that I have for you for today is to help you get started on a goal that will be meaningful to you, because I think it's impactful for you individually, but I'm also committed to the impact that you are creating within your practice. So what we work on here today is creating the seeds of something that I know is going to be so impactful for you in your practice and for the community that you serve. So thank you so much for joining me. It's been an honor to be here with you today. Take that sheet of notes and please bring those goals to fruition. I'd love to hear what you chose to work on. I'd love to hear how things unfold for you. So please do feel free to send me an email, reach out on LinkedIn, whatever's most convenient for you. And thank you again for being here, and all best wishes over the holidays and in the new year. Thank you so much.